You came back. Good. Pull up a chair and try not to make a sound. This is the last whisper. Something was found on the shore of a small fishing village last October. It wasn't a body, not exactly. It was a person, still breathing, still blinking, but completely hollowed out. No memories, no recognition, no fear. Just a symbol burned into the skin of the wrist, like it had been put there from the inside. When the paramedics arrived, the person looked up and said only one thing, over and over again. "It's already open." 3 weeks later, 4 more people vanished from that same village. Nobody, not the sheriff, not the Coast Guard, could explain where they went. But the old fishermen knew exactly what was happening. They just refused to say it out loud. Halverson Cove, Alaska, sits at the edge of a peninsula that becomes completely cut off from the mainland whenever storms roll in. The nearest town is 40 miles away. The population hovers around 200, mostly fishing families who have lived there for generations. And for generations, people in Halverson Cove have been disappearing. Not randomly, not occasionally, on a cycle. Every 40 to 50 years, a cluster of deaths and vanishings shakes the community down to its foundation. Each time, the same details surface in the incident reports. A symbol carved or burned into skin, victims who begin hearing something calling their name from the water at night, and a final disappearance that leaves no body behind. Elias Crane was 81 years old when the cycle started again. The moment he heard that a local girl named Marin had gone missing and that her severed hand had been found on her kitchen table, the palm branded with a symbol, Elias stopped sleeping entirely. He already knew what it meant. He had been waiting for it for over 50 years. Elias first encountered the thing in the water when he was barely 19. He had been out alone, fishing well past dark against every warning his father had ever given him, when something surfaced alongside his boat. Not a whale, not anything with a name. It was massive and lightless, and it made no sound, but Elias heard it perfectly. Not through his ears, somewhere behind his eyes. It told him he had been chosen, that it had already marked him. He woke up the next morning on shore, his boat missing, with a scar on his forearm he did not remember receiving. The symbol. What Elias did next is the part of this story that is difficult to explain without it sounding like the confession of a broken man. Because Elias did not run, he did not seek help. He spent years in quiet, obsessive research, old journals, church records, accounts from families who had lost people to the Cove going back to the 1800s. And when he finally understood what the entity was and what it wanted, he built a plan. There was a door. That is the only word that fits. A convergence point beneath the cove, where the boundary between this world and whatever existed on the other side had grown dangerously thin over centuries. The entity was a gatekeeper, something ancient that had been stranded on this side when the door was sealed long ago. Every few decades it surfaced, marked people, and used their suffering as raw fuel to crack that door open again. Elias sealed it. In the basement of the old cannery at the edge of town, where the water sat black and perfectly still, he performed a ritual assembled from decades of research. He imprisoned the entity inside a living vessel, his wife, Clara, the woman he loved more than anything. The ritual required a willing soul to serve as an anchor, and Clara had agreed. She looked at him the morning it happened and told him she understood. She told him to do what had to be done. He sealed the basement door. He threw away the key. He spent the next 50 years trying to convince himself that what he had done was mercy. When the new cycle began, Elias understood immediately. Someone had opened that basement. The entity had fed on Clara long enough, discarded what remained of her, and was now free. Deputy Tate Orasanwo was the sheriff handling Marin's case, and she was already overwhelmed. 2 fishermen vanished within the same week. A retired pastor was found nailed to the frame of his own front door, branded, still alive, completely unresponsive. He died 3 hours later without ever speaking. Elias told Tate everything. She did not believe him. Then she descended into that cannery basement and saw Clara, preserved impossibly, her body unchanged from 50 years ago, the same symbol carved across her neck. And when the symbol burned itself into Tate's forearm without anyone touching her, she stopped arguing. By then, the entity had already moved inside Elias, surfacing in his body when it chose to, going quiet when it wanted him to think he was still in control. It showed him things during those lost hours, visions of a drowned city beneath the ocean floor, structures that no human hand had built, an entire civilization that had existed before this one and intended to return. Elias's granddaughter Nora arrived that week. She had driven up from Anchorage, alarmed by his silence on the phone. She walked into a town that had completely come apart, windows boarded, families locked inside, nobody willing to go within sight of the water. When she found Elias, he begged her to leave. She refused. She was stubborn in exactly the way he had been at 19, and he recognized that with a dread that went deeper than anything the entity had shown him. Because the entity was counting on it. The deal it offered Elias was direct. Bring the grimoire, a text it had forced Elias to write during blackout episodes, hundreds of pages in his own handwriting filled with thoughts that were not his own. Bring it to the convergence point beneath the cove, place it at the threshold, and Nora would walk free. Elias knew it was a lie. He went anyway. Nora was already down there. Suspended in the walls of that submerged space, alive but barely, wrapped in something organic and pulsing that connected her body to the machine the entity had built from the remains of everyone it had taken. Elias did the only thing left that made any sense to him. He lowered himself into the old stone chamber at the convergence point, the same one he had used to seal the entity half a century before, and he told Nora what she needed to do. Seal it with him inside. The entity was in him. If she sealed the chamber, she would trap it. Nora refused. Then she looked into her grandfather's eyes and saw something moving behind them that was not him, and she sealed the chamber. From inside, Elias listened to the entity rage against the walls. He told it quietly that they were going to spend whatever came next together, that it was finished. The entity laughed. Because it was not in the chamber. It had already migrated into the grimoire, into the ink, into every word on every page that Elias had filled during those missing nights. And Nora had carried that book down to the threshold herself. She set it down, and the door opened. The last thing Elias heard before his prison went completely silent was the sound of something vast moving through water that had no business existing, coming through from the other side. Whatever had been sealed behind that door had been waiting an extraordinarily long time. It was no longer waiting. Elias did not fail because he was weak. He did not fail because he was outthought in the moment. He failed because the entity had engineered his failure 50 years in advance. It chose him specifically because of who he would love, who he would protect, and exactly how far that protection would drive him. Every decision he made, including the ones he believed were his own, led to the same outcome the entity had always intended. Reports from 3 fishing families along the Kenai Peninsula in 2019 described relatives who vanished near a stretch of coastline that does not appear on GPS or satellite maps. Each family went looking. Each family found the same thing. A symbol on a pillow, burned into the fabric from the inside. Something old enough and patient enough to plan across generations, selecting specific people, marking bloodlines, positioning the right souls in the right places decades before the moment they would be needed, does not make mistakes. It does not miss. And the question that nobody who hears this story can fully put down is a simple one. If that is what it does, if it chooses people long before they ever know they have been chosen, then what would it actually look like from the inside? Would it feel like free will? Would it feel like love? Would every choice you believed was yours turn out to be exactly what something else needed you to make?